Hey guys, although this is a fruit review of two varieties of Atemoya. One is called Phet Chong, hopefully I'm pronouncing that all correctly, but also known as PPCs. And the other one you don't hear too much about, it's called Elimbah Special from Australia. So even though this is a fruit tasting review, I wanted to touch on several different aspects of these varieties and even growing and eating anonas. So let's talk a little bit about that. I've been growing anonas for quite some time. It's probably the longest fruit type that I've been growing. Just so that people are aware, there is a neurotoxin in anona fruits, and it's pretty controversial topic, but there is a neurotoxin in it that is has been associated with like Alzheimer and dementia. So just for those that are like, if you have that in your family, genetics, kind of just keep that in mind. It's always kind of risk versus reward, and like a study that's kind of a little controversial. Some of it's more concrete these days, but just kind of keep all that in mind. Do your own research on it, but just kind of be aware of it, right? I'm for myself. I've been eating this food for a long time, but I really drastically stopped not stopped, but reduced the consumption of anona fruits about 15 years ago. These days, I eat it in moderation. It's such a good kind of family of fruits that I eat it in moderation every year, but I don't go crazy and overindulge myself in it. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's one thing. Just want to let you guys be aware of it, and you guys kind of do your own research on it, right? Another thing, let's talk about like these two varieties now and the growth pattern I've seen on these, and what's my kind of recommendation for it. So PPC, this one right here, the tree grows well. You do some hand pollination, it sets fruit well. The branches grow. They're not the most vigorous. Like, it still has a lot of characteristic of the sugar apple, and it's a beautiful fruit. This is a small fruit. I had some that's like half more the size of this. So it's not the most vigorous tree, but it grows well. It grows definitely better than a sugar apple. Only problem I ran into this is that it cracks a lot, and it cracks before it even rains, which is a problem here, right? So it's cracking. To me, I've noticed it start beginning to crack when we get into like the mid 40s in nighttime temps. I don't know how many days of it when we get into it, then where it starts to crack, but that's when I noticed that it starts cracking. So this year I actually began pollinating a lot of my flowers in April to try to see if I could get it to ripen and mature before we get into a rainy season and a cold season, right? I almost made it. I didn't get a chance to kind of check on it every day, but then when I did, lots of it cracked, and we hadn't even had rain yet, and it started splitting like crazy. So for any of you guys who really must grow this year, I'm going to even try to pollinate it even earlier. So what I do with that is you can defoliate your anona trees, and that induces it to push out new leaves and new blooms. And again, this works really well in milder climate area. I'm near the coast, so I can do that without fear of like frost or anything like that. If you're more like a kind of like a sensitive cold area, that might not work for you, but that is my attempt this year. This following year, I'm going to do that in February and see if I could get ripe fruit by like October before we get into those cool nights, and see what happens. That's a goal. That's the next plan for this. In terms of the taste, I am not a I try to be unbiased with my reviews in terms of like personal taste as much. I try to let people know what my personal taste is, and I am not a fan of the sugar apple. That's just me. I'm not a fan of it, but someone like my wife loves this. We had a few of the cracked fruits already. It's very has a strong sugar apple aroma. Probably the most dense and chewy most dense and chewy Atemoya I've had, and it's very, very, very close to. I mean, it's almost an exact kind of copy of a sugar apple. That's what it reminds me of. A little bit more complex flavor, but it's still kind of that one-dimensional sugar granular kind of sugar sweetness to it. So that's why I'm not too much of a fan of it. But a lot of people are, especially if you've grown up with this in the tropics. It's probably definitely something you definitely wanna kind of wanna taste, right? So for me, I'm not a fan of it. My favorite flavor profile is actually the Atemoya. And then the texture, I do like the denser, chewy texture, but I would rather favor the flavor versus the texture. But if ideally, I would like both. So look at it. It's a very pretty fruit. It looks almost like a sugar apple, but it's not as symmetrical as a sugar apple. That's the only thing I would have to say about it. Just definitely not as symmetrical as the sugar apple. So here's one that's cracked. So as I mentioned, I kind of touch on a few different topics on it. Let me see. I will come back and touch on the topic of cracked fruit and what you can try to do to kind of save those fruits. But let's jump to another variety. So if this Atemoya PPC is the closest thing to a sugar apple I've had, this one is called Elimbah Special from Australia. So it's spelled Elimbar and then special. From what I understand, that region has a lot of Anona breeding programs that's going on. Maybe that's where it got its name from, but it's definitely a variety from Australia. I got this from a friend of mine who has a graft of it, and his source came directly from Australia, right? So he got this directly from Australia in terms of the variety. I was not expecting much from this. It looks kind of like a African Pride 2, and I thought it'd be something in that range of taste for an African Pride 2. But it's definitely not, right? That's why we're going to take a review of this. If this one's the closest thing I've had to like a sugar apple, this might be the closest thing I had to a maybe I never had a very sweet sop, but maybe the closest thing there is to a sweet sour sop. I'm sorry, a sweet sour sop. And I had a friend tasted it a little bit, and that's what he said it reminded him of, and it does remind me of it too. It has the strongest acidity. It's intensely sweet, don't get me wrong. It is intensely sweet, but it has the strongest acidity or subacid component of any Atemoya or Atemoya I've had ever tasted. Very surprising, especially since it just looks kind of almost like maybe a little bit more bumpier African Pride. For myself, I don't grow too many varieties. I found that most of the varieties in the trade these days, they all kind of taste the same. Like they're either some sort of taste either similar to African Pride, similar to Gefner, similar to Lisa. That's kind of like the three main distinguishing flavors, combination of flavors and textures that I have seen in the trade. So for me, it's been like African Pride, Gefner, and Lisa. And everything I tasted, I always kind of tasted like that. So that's why I have these two. Like for me, I'm growing this mostly for my family. They like this PPC. Kind of reminds them of the sweet sop. So it is kind of not in that range of those three varieties I mentioned. And then I am keeping this one too because it reminds me of a very acidic could be a very acidic sweet sauce, very sweet too. So let's cut into this and see how it goes. I'm kind of just showing you guys this this variety just kind of for looks because of how pretty this PPC is. That one's kind of cracked. Let me talk a little bit more of the cracking, right? So here in California, lots of our fruit crack, especially when the weather gets a bit colder and it rains. So majority of them usually cracks when it rains. Sometimes it cracks in the colder night, but those usually it's not too bad, except for this variety. But usually most of the times, if you're growing like the African pride, and stuff, it doesn't really crack when we're getting into cold weather. It cracks when it rains, and that's just like it could kind of destroy your crop. So what happens is when you get these huge cracks, they start getting moldy and they start rotting before it gets ripe. See, like especially like a deep crack like this fissure. Some of it, like you crack and you could almost see the seeds of it, right? You would see the seeds of it on some of it. And how do you save it, right? How do you save that fruit? How do you kind of get it to still ripen without losing the fruit, And the reason why, you're like, some people say, why just throw it away, right? Just throw it away. And that's true. That sometimes I just throw it away too. But you got to remember, like everyone that's growing this is, are fans of the fruits, and they're expensive fruits. You got to keep that in mind. These things, if you were to buy it in the California kind of rate, it's probably anywhere between like $12 a pound to like $18 a pound, depending on the variety, right? Some more rarer variety is probably like $18. Some more popular, rare, and wanted varieties probably cost like $18 pounds, and that's it's the most priciest locally grown fruit that I know of in California. So that's why people try to save it, just think about this one fruit here. I think this is probably close to like a pound and a quarter or a half. That's like you're talking about like $14 a pound. That's like almost a $20 fruit, right? So that's why people do it, and people have tried all kinds of stuff, blow torching it and stuff like that. The ones I see tried often is blow torching it to try to keep the mold away. My favorite method, and this one that actually my wife kind of messed around with trying to save it and she figured out, is using a blow dryer. That's been the best method I've seen. But you have to keep on blow drying it. Like every single day until it gets soft. Else it's gonna mold for you, even just like skipping a day. And in that day, I try to do at least once. You could try at least once, but even doing it more than that, you have better results. You could keep on doing that. And the reason why I prefer that is like you could keep on doing it. If you blow torching this, right? There's only so many times you could blow torch it until you kind of just ruin the flavor. And I tried everything. I messed with everything on it, like trying to maybe seal the cracks with something that absorbs moisture, like rice or something. It doesn't work. Blow torching it, I tried that too. I just didn't like the flavor, the results off of that. And you can only blow torch it, so often until it just kind of ruins the flesh and it leaves a weird taste. So blow drying it is the best method. Just do it consistently. Do it as many times a day that you can, and that's the best way. That's my recommendation for saving these cracked foods. All right. So let me cut into this, and let's kind of do a review and take a look at it a little bit, right? Okay. Let's see. This one is a very dense sugar. Some of the sugar, some of the aromas, I could just kind of take it and I could just grab it and crack it open. Some varieties I can't do that with. Gethner, if you pick it at a peak time, you can't really do that with it. You can't just kind of split it open like that. PPC is one too, but PPC has an interesting Hopefully this does do it. Has an interesting peel where you could kind of almost peel it away easily. They kind of like that. The peel is very thick and leathery and it's bumpy. You could kind of just peel it like that away, and easy. Like if this was a pure sugar apple, you would call it an easy peel sugar apple. So that's the quality that PPC has. There you go, and you could just like bite into this. So how is the sweetness? Even at the best sweetness, it's not as intense as a Chong or a Atemoya. It's sweet. You can't say it's not sweet. It's a sweet fruit. But also, it's almost like comparing like it to a sapodilla. If you ever had any of the sapodilla, they're very intensely sugar-based, brown sugar forward tasting fruits. Okay, so very, very dense texture. The texture is just as dense as a sugar apple, like the chewy type sugar apple. So if you guys are not familiar with, there are two major strains of sugar apples that's grown in Southeast Asia. One breaks apart easily, like into like cardboards and like the fleshy sac that surrounds the seed, and then one doesn't, and that one is sometimes referred to as the chewy sugar apple or like an easy peel sugar apple. And those, like the cardboards or the flesh surrounding the seeds, you can't break it off almost like grains. It doesn't break off like grains. It stays together very dense. It's like this. You can't just kind of break off those individual sections. So those are the two strains of sugar apple in most of Asia, and most people tend to prefer this type, the dense type. The easy peel, the one that doesn't break apart into sections easily. But when it comes to Anonas, when it comes to Atemoyas, most of the breeding that has been done, from what I could tell, came from the other type of sugar apple, the other strain, which is the one that you could break into sections. That you could easily break into sections, and not this kind of dense kind of sugar apple variety. So that makes it interesting, right? PPC might be one of the most well-known one that is probably not, that did not came from that other strain of sugar apple, but everything else seems to have, every other Atemoya seems to have had that. Okay, I'll probably finish this later, or kind of save this for my wife. It's one of her favorites, not really my favorites. Like I said, it has a strong aroma of a sugar apple, and you love that. That's definitely for you. Okay, now next, I am going to open this Elimbah special. Look at this. It looks just like one of the different strains of like African Pride. Looks like a Lindstrom, and to me it looked like it would be tasting like that, right? And this is like one where you could just break it up. Beautiful, right? And see how this is all dried from the blow drying. It's almost like a rough skin. So that's what you're trying to achieve, where you're trying to save some of these big fruits that has cracked, and like I said, blow drying has been the best thing that has seemed to work from so many different experiments we've done on trying to save cracked fruits, and it's one my wife figured out, and it works perfectly. So just kind of big tip for you guys on that one. You try to save your cracked fruit. Don't go with like a flame torch or anything like that. Go with a blow dryer. All right, let's taste this one. And to be honest, I wasn't even sure I was going to do a review on this, but I thought I had to, just because maybe some of you guys out there are growing Elimbah special. I don't really know of anyone else growing this one. It's such a good variety. I don't know why I haven't heard much of it, you know? Okay, and this is what I'm talking about in terms of like the carpet, so the flesh around the seed separates easily, and that's not really a feature of like you see on the PPC, and mostly because of that, mostly that's because it's also because you know, most of these Atemoya's hybrids came from that selection of sugar apple, the kind of the ones that break up into carpels. Sometimes I've seen it referred to as a rice or grain sugar apple versus like the chewy sugar apple. So this is so good. This is like intensely sweet and very strong sub-acidity to it. And you know, I was not really planning to kind of, you know, like I said, I try to keep varieties in my yard that is very different, because there's so many backyard or new varieties of Atemoya these days. You know, I don't kind of keep up with it. So the ones I do grow, I try to grow are the ones that are uniquely different tasting from each other. And this has kind of fit the bill. The only problem I'm worried about on this is that this did crack, and I don't know if that happened because the fruit was overripe or if it was just naturally tends to crack. Next year I'll probably know a little bit more about it. I do plan to kind of add more grafts of this. So if you're growing this, let me know. Hit me up, put some comments on there. I'm just curious if everybody's getting the same kind of flavor that I am on this. Because I love the strong sub-acidity on this. Yeah, I mean, I love the strongest sub-acidity of this. Almost has like a, because of it, almost has like a pineapple kind of component to it. I mean, I imagine like a very sweet soursop might. This probably still is sweeter than that, but you know, has some flavors that are reminiscent of a very sweet soursop. This is probably, I mean, to be honest with you guys, like I didn't have high expectation for this fruit, but this might be one of my favorites along with Gefner. I still like Gefner because I do like the texture of Gefner. Gefner kind of has a texture that's a little bit leans a little bit more towards like a PPC, where it's kind of that dense texture. You don't let it kind of over ripen and stuff like that. But I love the strong sub acidity of this. You know, it reminds me of a Atemoya. It's like 10, or it's much stronger than a Atemoya too. So yeah, so that's why I'm doing this review, kind of seeing if you guys have heard of this variety. If you have, let me know, put some comments on there if you have grown it. But this might be one of my favorites variety going forward. I'm gonna try to graft a few more branches on my tree. As of right now, I have one branch of it. It's not in the best spot on my tree, but it's gonna get some more grafts on it, and I'm gonna put it on more like prime spots in my yard. Nice texture around the seed couples. It's very juicy, versus kind of like a PPC, which is kind of a bit more denser and drier texture. Okay, definitely one I would highly recommend for folks. The growth habit on this one, I forgot to mention, is like it's not the strongest grower. I have to say that, because the reason why I end up pollinating these very early, because I mistaken the branch for a PPC branch. I didn't realize later until the fruitlet set that, oh, this was not PPC, which I was trying to get to ripe to a point where it would be ripe earlier, and that's when I realized this was my Elimbah Select and not the PPC. Or Elimbah Special. I keep on calling it Select, but Elimbah Special. Okay. Well, guys, that was a good fruit. I could probably easily finish this, but I'll probably do that off camera and stuff. But there you go. That is my review of PPC and Elimbah Special. Two pretty unique flavors. Depending on what you guys like, I would recommend you guys try to do one or the other. Like I mentioned with PPC, tends to crack a lot. Lots of people have tried growing it and given up on it in California. I haven't given up on it yet because my wife hasn't let me give it up on it yet. So with the PPC, my kind of just hypothesis on that, my plan on that is to try to get the fruits to ripen before we get into like mid 40s chilly climate. So that means defoliating, getting to pollinate the flowers as early as possible, and hopefully the fruits ripen before we get into the nights that's in the mid 40s. That's my recommendation for some of you guys that are growing PPC, and it's like a must-have to grow for you guys. And you know, this is like the third year I had it. It just cracks all the time. unfortunately. And everyone has ran into that same challenge with growing PPC, that it just tends to crack all the time. So a lot of people just have given up on it. And so that's my suggestion for you guys in terms of like what to do with a PPC. Try to get it mature fruits right before we get into the chilly night temperature, because it's cracking not even due to rain. It's cracking way before that. Okay, so that's PPC. This is Elimbah Special. My new favorite, maybe. This is a good tasting fruit. Very, very strong sweetness, intensely sweet, and intense sub-acid component to it. Really love this one. So there you go, guys. That's my two kind of recommend. Oh, PPC, Elimbah Special. I forgot about the growth habit. It grows a bit faster than PPC from what I could tell. A little bit larger leaves, but it's definitely not like a strong, vigorous grower, you know. And both of these trees are both of these fruits came from the same rootstock, the same tree, which is a 30-year-old rootstock that has multiple different varieties grafted onto it. So just a little bit more information for you guys on that. All right, guys. Thanks everyone. You stuck through this long review that kind of touched a little bit aspect of everything. Thanks for tuning in and staying with me to the end. All right. Till next time, guys.